Welcome back. Now, Nigeria's inflation rate has eased for the first time in 19 months, declining to 33.40% in July 2024, below the 34.19% reported in June 2024. In the Consumer Price Index published on Thursday by the National Bureau of Statistics, the inflation rate decreased by 0.8%. Now, the Bureau revealed that the headline inflation rate in July showed a 0.3 percent points lower when compared to the June 2024 headline inflation rate. The NBS also said the food inflation rate in July dropped to 39.5% compared to 40.87% in June. On a year-on-year basis, the headline inflation rate was 9.32 percent points higher compared to the rate recorded in July 2023, which was 24.08%. The Bureau also said on a month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate in July 2024 was 2.28%, which was 0.03% lower than the 2.31% rate now recorded in June 2024. Now, the reduction comes after the recent tightening of the monetary policy rate by the Central Bank of Nigeria in July 2024. Inflation in Nigeria has been on a steep upward trend, driven predominantly by food inflation. Meanwhile, the Senate has launched an investigation into the petroleum sector to unmask economic saboteurs with a view to addressing the deep-seated and multifaceted challenges bedeviling the industry. It's also examining the pre-shipment, pre-discharge standard test parameters adopted by the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority with a view to uncovering loopholes being exploited to get toxic cargoes into the country. The Senate Ad hoc Committee is also investigating how institutions across the importation and distribution chain fail to conduct quality sampling, shipped in products without auditing, and perform port validations, among many others. According to reports now, a public hearing is slated for September 10th, 2024, while the committee is to visit the Warri, Kaduna, and Port Harcourt refineries at a yet-to-be-announced date to engage key actors there. Well, let's discuss all of this further. Now being joined on the program by the Chief Executive Officer of Kari Asset Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu. Also joining us is economist Segun Sopitan. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the program. Let me start with you, Mr. Chukwu. This drop in inflation rate, not significant, but do you think this is a sign of better days to come and that we are now on the downward trend as far as inflation goes?
What I would say is that the good thing is it gives someone a good that for a very long time we are seeing it drop from 34.19% to 33.95%. A drop of as high as I wouldn't say we would have gotten to the point where we can trend, where it may be too early to call. Recall that the major factor that drove inflation down, food inflation. Food inflation dropped from a high of 40.87% to 39.53%. And that was a drop of over 1.34% in a month. So we have to see a sustained reduction in prices. I have actually advocated that once we have a hand on inflation, inflation will begin to moderate. Why did I say that it's too early to say we have a trend? Not because we have a decline in a single, because food inflation is very volatile, and that's why they talk of excluding volatile items to arrive at core inflation. And if you look at core inflation, it just barely shifted. Core inflation was about 27.47% in the month of June, July, up just slightly below the month of 0.07%. So, but dwelling on core food inflation, remember when the harvest season and major food items like tuber, this is the time when it is harvested. Most of the major food Nigerians eat are harvested around this. So if you look at the drop in food prices during the harvest period, it might not define a trend because you're going to go past the harvest period into the planting season. So until I see a consistent trend of declining food inflation through the planting season, that's when one can be can say with some level of assurance that we've entered the period of.
Mr. Shokwito, can the CB, because look, the CBN has been tightening now for a very long time. Can we say, because obviously, I mean, at the next MPC meeting, there's a possibility that the CBN will come out to say, look, it's because of its tightening measure that we're beginning to see a reduction now in inflation. But can we pin this down to the measures taken by the MPC so far?
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit too early to come to that conclusion. I think you have to see a pattern, maybe over at least a 3-month period, to determine exactly what is going on, and then you can begin to attribute, this development to specific causes. So I wouldn't say necessarily that this has to do with the tightening stance of the CBN over the last, for as long as you can remember. The last 6 or 7 MPC meetings, they've been tightening. If you look at money supply, you find that in spite of the tightening, and this is instructive and significant, in spite of the tightening measures of the CBN, money supply has continued to grow. As of July, which is last month, we actually crossed the 100 trillion naira mark, coming from the CBN website. So, 101 trillion money supply, in spite of the tightening. A month before that, we were 96 trillion, or 96 or 97 thereabouts. We had gotten down to somewhere around 93 trillion, a few months ago. So the tightening measures may not necessarily be achieving the results that the CBN is seeking to achieve. Don't forget that the primary response that you expect from the NPR shift in the NPR rate is the impact it has on money supply and maybe lending rates and curbing, borrowing at credits, activities within the economy. So I don't think we can attribute this yet. I think, like Mr. Chukwu said, you have to look to other places. And primarily, the harvest season, like he said, but I also think perhaps the fiscal measure that the federal government took recently may have achieved some of this that we're seeing now, because the biggest mover, the biggest decline in inflation, or in the rate of growth of inflation, has been food. So if you look at the duty waiver that was announced, and I'm not even sure that has been implemented, so I'm not even sure we can attribute it to it. But perhaps if that has now been implemented, the last I heard of this, the customs was still trying to come up with the modalities for achieving that. So maybe that is not even the primary reason. Maybe it is indeed just about the harvest. So we'll have to wait to see over the next 2 to 3 months before we can begin to pin specific reasons and causes to this improvement that we're seeing. So it's far from Uhuru, it's far from trying to roll out the drums. This is just a slight dip. And if you look at the trend over the last, say, 5 years, and then you find that it's been an upward climb since then, with very minimal reductions here and there. So, we still have to wait to see.
The MPC meeting will be happening, I think, in a couple of months, maybe sometime in, is it September or so? If, for instance, the next figure, say the figure of August comes out and food inflation comes down further, are we likely to see the MPC probably adopting a whole stance, or probably, taking things easy with its tightening?
If we go by the pattern that we've seen from the NPC over the last year and a half, and especially also under the new CBN, you wouldn't expect a sudden change in stance just because of this. Even if we see a further decline in the month of August, for example, I would expect that the data regarding the monetary side of the economy, especially money supply, the volume of credits, the cost of credit, and other indicators like that will determine what they will do before they can act on the actual inflation numbers themselves. So what I would probably expect to see if this trend continues in August is they might still go for a slight tightening, but maybe by a lesser degree. Maybe the number of basis points will be cut down, say maybe to 25 basis points or something like that. I think before we begin to see either a hold or an easing of their stance, we would have had to have recorded significant gains against against inflation. So like I said, it's not time to roll out the drums, and I'm sure that this will be the position of the CBN and the other members of the MPC. We need to see more with headline inflation. We need to see more with core inflation. We need to see what's happening around other sectors aside from food, and we need to also keep an eye on food itself. If, for example, what we are seeing now is as a result of just the fact that this is harvest season, what happens when supply of food? If money supply is still as high as it is, which means that the demand pull pressures are still there. Then what happens when supply side on the food of the food basket dries up or slows down? As we push towards the end of the year. So I think that we shouldn't expect to see any easing and probably not even a hold position from the NPC for the coming meeting. Maybe subsequently, if this trend and pattern is maintained, and if we can actually see a reduction in money supply, then we may begin to celebrate such a stance. I think it's also important to note, the floating of the bond, the dollar bond, by the federal government, as announced by the Minister of Finance recently, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, would also be significant, in dealing with the inflation issue, as that may help deal with the exchange rates side of the pressure, as well as the liquidity management implications that may also have within the economy. So when we see the impact of this over the next 2 to 3 months, then we can begin to see maybe the CBN and the MPC begin to take an easing of their stance. But for now, I don't think so.
We still have a serious problem with Mr. Chukwu's audio. I really don't know what the problem is. Your audio appears to be breaking up. We'll still try to fix it. But Mr. Chukwu, why do we have this increased money supply despite the tightening measures of the CBN?
Well, I think perhaps you might want to look, towards the federal government and the fiscal side of things. In spite of all of the best efforts of the CBN, it would appear as though the federal government on the fiscal side may still be adopting expansionary measures, measures that so the spending from government, I'm not sure has abated. If anything, the federal government is still borrowing significantly and spending on large projects, disbursing funds into the system, So for us to see an easing of money supply, the monetary side will need to do what they need to do with the tightening, but the fiscal side must also find ways to curtail spending. You've got to deal with government spending because the government is the single biggest player in our economy and in most economies across the world. So if you want money supply to go down, ways and means, borrowing from the CBN, which I think the CBN says has been cut down, will have to go. And then, but beyond that, you would have to be more controlled with how you approach the infrastructure development and spending, on that side of the equation, for money supply to reduce. If you don't, then you might be working at cross purposes. You have the monetary authorities pulling in one direction, and the fiscal authorities pushing in the other direction, and you may see very little effect. So I will say that governments in particular should look at the fiscal side if they really want to curtail, this continued surge in money supply.
All right, Mr. Shokunda, I think I'll just have to let you go here because we'll try to bring back Mr. Johnson Chukwu to get his views as well. But thank you so very much for your time, and thank you for your contribution. I appreciate this.
You're always welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you. All right, we'll take a short break, and we'll try to bring back Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Stay with us, don't go away. Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal. How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
Because when you go into public office, you must be ready to answer to the people.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it, use it to take action.
I don't think there's any need for any governor to look for grant for ranching.
DEJI360, dissecting the issues. All right, welcome back. And I think now we can have Mr. Johnson Chukwu. We've been able to sort out the audio. We sincerely apologize for the audio issue there. But let's go back to this issue of inflation now. First is, how do you see the CBN responding at the next MPC meeting? And then the second question will be, why do we continue to have a rise in money supply even when the CBN has been tightening?
Okay, I think in the first place, what the central bank will do is to watch the trend and to see if there's a trend. A one-time decline in inflation is not yet a trend. So the central bank is not going to act in a haste. They will watch for subsequent months' inflation figures to see if inflation begins to decelerate or the decline we had in the month of July is just a one-off. So I think what they will do is the next meeting is at best to hold all rates at the current levels. Why do I say they could possibly hold all the rates at current level? Because the rates are already too high. We are talking about 26.75% MPR rate. We are talking of a lending rate in the market of the region of 35%, which is hurting the real sector of the economy. So ordinarily, one should not expect a further tightening given where we have gotten to. But I also do not think a one-time decline in inflation rate would be enough reason, justification for the Monetary Policy Committee to begin to loosen. I think the most likely action would be to hold and see if there's a trend, if a trend would evolve, and that evolving trend would help them determine which direction to go. Then why is money supply still increasing, irrespective of the fact that the central bank have been tightening monetary policies for quite some time? The reason is this. The disbursement that are going to the 3 tiers of government has continued to increase. If you look at the total disbursement in the first 7 months of this year compared to the total disbursement in the first 7 months of last year, you have an increase of more than 40%, almost 50%. And then you are talking of FAC allocation in the region of 1.4, 1.5 trillion naira a month. And that goes into the entire financial system. So what the central bank had been pulling out from was monies held by private sector players, those who are investing in treasury bills, those who are investing in federal government bonds. That's the money that the central bank is able to take out of the system. But injection coming from the government, from the public sector, the central bank is not able to take it out. So I think the increase in money supply is largely coming from public sector disbursement by way of financial account allocation.
And even though you spoke on this, but there was a problem with the audio, I'd also want you to speak on it again, on these measures by the government. Now, I'm talking about the fiscal measure to, the waivers they're adopting now on food imports. What impact do you see that having on inflation? Because the customs have now released the guidelines. We now know what will be imported and how much duty-free there will be. So what impact do you expect this to have on inflation going, especially when the implementation begins?
Unfortunately, I think the impact will be very moderate. And I'm saying that without seriousness, because the duty waivers are largely on food items. And the food items that Nigeria imports are largely not the food that most average households consume. The duty waiver will impact mostly on the likes of wheat, which would flush into bread, and then you have rice and maybe beans. The rest of the food on an average household table are locally made. Things like tuber, cassava or cassava meals, plantain, cocoyam, and then vegetables, fish. So those are largely made, poultry products are largely from what is produced locally. So I don't think we're going to see such a drastic change. And if you really want to look at it, the decline we saw in inflation rates in the month of July was largely done from food and not beverage items. And then you have transport expenditure, which moderated marginally. And then you have rents and stuff like that, water. But most components of the food of the all item inflation did not shift. If you look at the core inflation only declined by 0.07% between July and June. And that simply means that the factor driving core inflation, which is high exchange rate, has to moderate. And the policies that the fiscal authority have put in place are not geared towards focus on exchange rate. Of course, if we have an improvement in crude oil production, that will impact the exchange rate. Maybe the 500 billion that the fiscal authorities are trying to raise by way of the diaspora bond may affect the exchange rate. But the question is, the duty waivers, will they have material impact on inflation rate? I think it is very moderate.
And finally, what's your take on this investigation being carried out by the Senate? You know, to sort of unravel and deal with the challenges we have, especially in the oil industry.
You know, I smile because I've gotten to a point in my life that investigation by the National Assembly and similar bodies, arms of government, seem to be like a circus where they are just there to entertain us. If you remember the forensic audit or investigation of NDDC, DEJI, I'm yet to hear the outcome.
Yes.
The issues around why we're not producing enough crude does not require any investigation. We know the pipelines are being breached. We know that the local communities are not do not have an alignment between their needs and the national interest. We know that there was no major investment in exploration and production for a long time. We know that many of the oil majors have moved away from the onshore and offshore assets and were moved. Those who have decided to control the country have moved to deep offshore. And we know that the fiscal arrangement that govern the deep offshore production or drilling are the production sharing contracts, where Nigeria's share is minimal, contrary to joint venture arrangements where Nigeria's share is about 60% for the onshore and offshore assets. So these are facts we know. We don't need any panel to go and investigate that. For me, all these issues about investigation are just getting judged from the voice. So if the government wants to tackle these issues and they're decided and they're resolute, politically resolute, I don't think they need any new investigation to unravel anything. There's certainly nothing to unravel. The issues are all open to all of us.
Chuku, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks for your contribution.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much, sir. Well, that's it on the program this week. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.